Dust swirled in lazy spirals along the village's red earth lane as twilight lowered its cool hand. Beside the lane a giant baobab, broad as a house, older than rumor, raised tangled roots to form a snug hollow where 12-year-old Sifa knelt, lips moving across neat lines of ink. Her notebook was no shop marvel but a patchwork of maize-sack scraps and palm ribs, sewn with fishing twine and guarded like treasure. She read by the last spill of sunlight, though the brighter glow was on her face. A sparrow hopped close, listening to her whispered cadences, then darted away. Behind the trunk her sister Malika hovered, clutching an empty calabash she had forgotten to fill. Malika's stare was flint. She loved Sifa, yet love knotted with resentment becomes a vine that bruises the one who tends it. Memories tightened the knot. When their mother, Malkia, lived, the sisters shared a nightly ritual. Under a raffia mat's soft fray she opened her one prized storybook, cover cracked, pages fragrant with smoke and hibiscus. Words marched across fading indigo and her calm voice coaxed them alive. Tales of clever hares, patient queens, restless rivers. The sisters' heads rested on her lap like twin moons. When lightning flashed on far hills Malkia called it the silver pen of the sky writing more lines. Then a sudden fever came. Villagers anointed her, prayed, sobbed. Dawn stole her breath. The storybook became both relic and refuge. Sifa slept with it under thin arms. Malika, older, felt its pull too, but grief and pride wrestled inside her. Weeks later a cousin asked to borrow the book. Terrified of losing the last cent of their mother, Malika hid it beneath loose floor reeds. She meant to return it, but shame turned hours into seasons. Sifa wept, searching corners, whispering, "It still smells like mama." Malika offered clumsy comfort, yet every day the question in Sifa's eyes deepened the wall between them. Now, under the baobab, jealousy bloomed anew. Sifa lifted her face toward the pink sky and recited a line she had copied from memory. A story is a drum whose skin is stretched with hope. Beat it, and hearts march. The words stung. Malika pictured her own hands, coarse from pounding cassava, never praised the way Sifa's nimble quill was. Their father, Jabari, likely bragged at that very moment that his youngest would rewrite the world. A mosquito buzzed. Malika slapped it, rustling leaves. Sifa turned, eyes shining, and smiled, delighted. Malika's throat closed, she imagined praising the prose, asking to hear more. Instead she tightened her grip on the empty calabash and stepped back, the creak of roots swallowing her retreat. Night spread quickly. Hearth fires blinked across the village like fallen stars. Sifa bundled her papers in oiled cloth. She did not see her sister slip into their hut and brush dirt from the warped cover hidden below. Their mother's lost book, its spine scorched by memory. Wind rose, carrying charcoal scent and distant cattle songs. Sifa pressed the bundle to her chest, yearning to show Malika her latest ending, certain they still shared a heart even if they no longer shared ours. Behind her, Malika felt the book's weight and her own. Envy, guilt, longing, love. A single loose page drifted from Sifa's bundle, twirling through jasmine night and landing beside a clay oven. Ink still wet, it waited for dawn and discovery. Old women shuffled past the baobab carrying smoked tilapia for market at dawn. Their finger-to-lip greetings asked Sifa to keep reading so the tale might finish its flight. She answered with a nod and traced each sentence twice, tasting its rhythm before saying it. Language, she believed, was her second bloodstream. From her hiding place Malika remembered when mother first let Sifa turn a page. They had sat beneath this same tree, the book smelled of wood smoke and shea butter. "Turn gently," mother whispered, guiding toddler fingers. That night Sifa fell asleep repeating a single line while Malika, ate and watchful, marveled at how words could enter a child's dreams. Jealousy had not arrived like lightning, Malika knew. It gathered grain by grain each time someone praised Sifa's cleverness, until one morning she discovered an empty stretch where her own confidence should have been. Across the lane their father Jabari was indeed boasting. Malika heard him tell the headman how Sifa copied an entire folktale after hearing it once. The praise stung yet strangely warmed her because pride still lived inside the hurt. A traveling storyteller climbed down from a donkey cart, children clustering at his knees. He beat a slit drum, sending low heartbeats through the dusk. Sifa longed to join but finished her paragraph first. Discipline, mother had said, keeps a promise from smudging. Seeing the crowd, Malika almost stepped forward. Perhaps if they listened together the rift might heal. But she pictured Sifa solving every riddle and her courage faded. That sense of shrinking drove her toward their hut, away from lamps and laughter. Sifa wrapped her papers, whispered thanks to the baobab, and started home beneath a rising moon. Wind carried goat bells, drumbeats and the scent of jasmine. Behind clay walls Malika brushed soil from the hidden book's cover, its spine still faintly warm with memory. Returning it would mean confessing a year-long lie, yet she felt tonight's wind rummaging through her spirit, asking which weighed more, shame or silence. She pressed her ear to the mud wall and heard the storyteller ending with a promise. Every ember can be coaxed into flame again. For the first time Malika wondered if the same might be true of sisters, of lost hearts. Asked ChatGPT. The sun wobbled above the thatched roofs like a copper drum, already pulsing with heat when Sifa hurried down the hard-packed path toward the village school. She carried her stitched-leaf notebook and a charcoal stick smoothed to a taper, tools she cherished more than the silver anklet other girls saved for festival days. Dust puffed around her ankles, yet she clutched the notebook to her chest as though guarding a candle flame. The school was little more than 2 clay rooms under a roof of rusty tin, but to Sifa it felt as wide as a palace library. She slipped onto the front bench and greeted Teacher Kalum, the man who called her my question box. After the morning chorus of salutation, he announced an unexpected visitor. A lanky inspector in a khaki coat, spectacles glowing, stepped inside. Clipboard underarm, he asked the class to continue arithmetic so he might observe. Chalk squeaked until he halted beside Sifa. On her slate she had not only solved the fraction problem but turned it into a riddle about storytellers sharing maize. The inspector asked her to explain her steps, then posed a harder question drawn from lessons 2 years ahead. She answered, shaping logic like river clay. His eyebrows climbed. When the break bell rang, Inspector Mutiso consulted with Teacher Kalum and finally handed Sifa a stamped form inviting her to the Regional Academy Scholarship exam. Full tuition, boarding, and books. Her pulse thrummed like a drumskin. News raced through the yard. Classmates tried to hoist her onto their shoulders. Amid the cheers Sifa thought of Malika, home churning butter, wishing her sister could taste the moment. Malika's day had begun before dawn, stoking the fire and hauling water from the shallow well. She had left school to keep the household breathing after their mother died. Pride in service could not quench the ache of being forgotten. That afternoon she squatted outside slicing cassava when Asha ran up, blurting the scholarship news. The roots slipped from her hands. Pride twisted itself with envy. Father Jabari returned at dusk, beard dusty from the fields. Sifa recited the inspector's words. Jabari's laughter boomed. He promised roasted groundnuts and music to celebrate. Inside, Malika stirred millet porridge, letting the spoon absorb her tremors. The praise pouring through the doorway warmed and singed her. At dinner Jabari spoke of ancestors who honored griots and scribes. He told Malika the chores she shouldered were also a story of courage. Sifa reached across the calabash and squeezed her sister's wrist. "Read the passages with me," she asked. "Generosity can wound where contempt fails." Malika withdrew to trim the lantern. Later they sat under the dim lamp. Sifa copying geometry, Jabari humming a field song, Malika mending a torn net. The scholarship form glowed waxy red on the low table. Sifa asked her sister to test her on the theorems. Malika quizzed briskly, envy unable to blunt her keen memory. Jabari watched, thinking rivalry is fire. Harnessed, it cooks. Unbridled, it consumes. When the oil waned he reminded them a tale must be told by many tongues. Each of you holds a corner of our story. If both corners lift, the cloth can fly. Sifa leaned against Malika and whispered, "Fly with me." Malika did not pull away, but neither did she lean back. Outside, the moon traced silver across the yard. Within the hut 2 sisters faced opposite walls yet breathed the same night air, each wondering how far a fire could burn before it lit the world, or turned it to ash. Teacher Kalum began the morning by turning arithmetic into story, chalking tiny suns beside clusters of raindrops so the children would remember that numbers, like seasons, return. A stray goat poked its whiskered chin through the window until Kalum tapped the board and joked, "Let not the goat solve the sum before you." Laughter rippled, breaking the hush that clothed his lessons. Inspector Mutiso's boots creaked as he paced between benches, eyes flicking over copybooks scrawled with digits and doodles of lizards. Sifa's heart kicked against her ribs. She breathed 3 times just as mother used to teach, and the riddle poured from her charcoal stick as naturally as birdsong. When she read it aloud, her voice trembled on the first word, by the second it flew. During the morning break, while pupils pelted fruit seeds at a can, the inspector sat with Teacher Kalum beneath a neem tree, quizzing him about the village's enrollment. Sifa lingered by the pump, ears straining. She heard her name, a whistle of approval, and she felt taller than the neem itself. The sun pressed like a hand on her shoulders as she walked home, but excitement carried her. She rehearsed how she would tell Malika, how they could travel to the capital together, how letters would fly back and forth like birds. Each step painted the fantasy in richer color until she rounded the final bend and saw her sister's back hunched over the cassava tub. Malika's knife rose and fell in a rhythm as drumbeats. Asha came running breathless. "You won," she shouted. Malika jerked, nicking her thumb. A bead of blood swelled like an accusation. Asha's words piled up: scholarship, city, dormitories, while Sifa hovered at the edge, unsure where to stand. That night Jabari insisted on pumpkin stew and extra groundnuts to honor the first of our clan to challenge the academy gates. After supper he drew Mother's old reed pen from an oiled pouch and set it in Sifa's hand. Then he fastened a cowrie bracelet around Malika's wrist. "A roof shines in sunlight," he told her, "but walls keep the family dry." The praise was meant to balance the scales, yet it only deepened their tilt. Hours later Sifa lay planning sentences for letters not yet written, while across the room Malika traced the ridges of each cowrie, wondering whether courage meant holding the walls or daring to walk beyond them. Ask ChatGPT. Dust settled in hazy sheets over the yard as twilight sagged toward night. Inside the hut, smoke from the cooking hearth coiled along the rafters, tracing shapes like half-formed words. Sifa hunched at the low table, tongue caught between her teeth, copying a proverb about forgiveness onto the final page of her notebook. Tomorrow she would sit the scholarship exam 5 miles away, and every inked stroke felt like a promise whispered to the future. Across the room Malika folded laundry into a reed basket while watching her sister's charcoal pen glide. 4 days the village had spoken of nothing but Sifa's brilliance. Her numbers, her stories, her bright tomorrow that already stretched beyond their fields. No one recalled that Malika had once sat on the same bench before grief dragged her home. She touched the burn-scarred cover of their mother's lost storybook hidden beneath cloth, guilt and jealousy mixing like bitter herbs on her tongue. Jabari entered, beard dusty from the fields, carrying roasted groundnuts. He laid a gentle hand on Malika's shoulder, "Quick thanks for a tidy house," then bent over Sifa's work, laughing at her clever proof as though he'd found gold among stones. Malika clenched her teeth, tasting smoke before any fire had begun. When Jabari left to meet the elders, Sifa gathered her papers into a braided satchel and set it near her mat. She washed her hands, humming an old lullaby. In that brief moment Malika's pulse kicked like a trapped bird. Through the doorway she saw sparks from the communal brush pile rising into the dark. A reckless thought took shape: lift the satchel, feed the blaze, test destiny itself. If fate truly favored Sifa, even fire could not stop her. If not, better the dream die now than leave them all behind. She snatched the bundle, slipped outside, and glided along the wall until the courtyard fire winked huge and hungry before her. Untying the knot, she felt a tremor of doubt, but envy shoved harder. The first notebook fell open like a fledgling. She tossed it into the heart of the flames. Paper curled, ink hissed, and wind rushed through the thorn fence like breath over a flute. One by one the rest followed, years of study devoured in seconds. Back inside, Sifa dried her hands and reached for the satchel. Her fingers closed on emptiness. She spun, saw the courtyard flicker too bright, too eager, and ran barefoot into the night. She burst into the firelight as pages burst into sparks. Against the dancing glow stood Malika, eyes reflecting gold like coins sunk in oil. "No!" Sifa cried, lunging for a half-charred leaf, but the words had melted into black lace. Geometry riddles, folk retellings, poems, everything drifted upward as glowing moths. The commotion drew neighbors. Children thought a festival had begun. Old Musa muttered omens. Women with water gourds whispered that too much schooling makes a girl proud and restless. A shepherd snickered, "Let her read smoke now." Another voice countered, "Proud minds build new granaries." The fire crackled, swallowing every argument. Sifa dropped to her knees, heat blistering her calves, tears streaking ash down her cheeks. "Why?" she croaked. Malika's answer was a brittle whisper, "I needed silence." The confession hung like a broken drumbeat. Jabari arrived, following the smoke column. Spectators parted as he beheld the ruin. He seized a gourd, doused the tallest flames, and steam roared into the sky. When the hiss subsided, only warped black petals remained, sticking together in ugly bouquets. Sifa reached but let her hand fall. "Nothing left," she said, voice small as a cricket. Malika stared at the glazed clay where ink had melted, seeing her own warped reflection. Triumph had been promised, hollow grief arrived instead. Teacher Kalum hurried in, lifted a charred fragment to the moonlight. One sentence survived: "A flame is a mouth that knows only one story." He placed it in Sifa's palm. Ash can still mark cloth, he murmured. Jabari turned to the ring of villagers. Curiosity is quenched, he said, his voice iron. Most drifted away, though whispers lingered like embers in dry grass. Asha lingered, tears slipping, unsure whom to comfort. Finally she retreated into the gloom. Inside the hut the lamp had guttered. Jabari sat heavy on the mat, back bowed. Sifa crouched beside him, clutching the shriveled sliver of story. Malaika hovered in the doorway, unable to cross the threshold. Moonlight silvered her cheeks, revealing tracks of soot and sorrow. They breathed one shaken silence, a silence loud as drums, signaling that the night of quiet resentments had ended and the long dawn of consequences was already on its way. Earlier that evening, even before Jabari left for the elder's porch, he had presented Sifa with their mother's reed pen, the one once used to annotate bedtime tales. The nib was cracked but serviceable. He had rubbed it smooth against river stone. Placing it across her palms like a delicate scepter, he whispered, "Carry this tomorrow so your mother's voice travels with yours." The gift felt lighter than a feather yet heavier than iron. Sifa tucked it beside her exam pass, cheeks glowing. Across the room Malaika watched the exchange, envy rising like fever, imagining a future where her own name was spoken only as a footnote in Sifa's legend, and the fever sharpened into resolve. Long after most villagers had wandered home, a cool wind threaded through quince branches and fanned tiny coals alive again. Sifa knelt until her knees bled, sifting rubble for salvage. A half-legible proverb, a corner of a diagram, a brittle scrap inked by her mother's long-dead hand. She placed the fragments on a calabash lid as though piecing a shattered star map. Quiet vows escaped her lips. She would rewrite every lost story, twice as daring, thrice as bright. Nearby, Malaika sank to the ground, arms wrapped around herself, rocked by a storm no flame could warm. The night held its breath, awaiting dawn to decide whose resolve would endure. Ask ChatGPT. Morning light found Sifa still crouched beside the cold pit, fingertips black with soot and dawn dew. Every charred curl she salvaged left a new smudge on her skin, yet she handled the scraps as gently as injured birds. Here was half a proverb, who buries a drum, and over their 2 geometry lines bent like wilted stems. None were usable, but each carried the shape of what had been. By the time roosters crowed she had arranged the fragments on a reed mat in a haphazard constellation. The pattern looked nothing like her notebooks, yet she stared until her eyes burned, memorizing every jagged edge so the lost lines would keep echoing in her mind even after the wind claimed the ash. Beneath the baobab root hollow she whispered a vow loud enough for her own heart to hear. Jealousy would not become fate and silence would not become heritage. She folded the scraps into a banana leaf packet, ink powdering the green surface like ghost rain, then rose to face a village that now felt smaller but held the same restless sky. As she walked, voices drifted from doorways, pitying, scolding, curious, yet no one barred her path. They simply watched to see whether ruin would break or bend her. At the market the clang of metal pots, the bray of goats, and the sweet slap of papaya against a carving board braided together in the familiar weekday chorus. Amid the bustle, Bibi Rahima's stall stood under a sagging palm frond awning, its low benches piled with calabashes, ropes of dried chili, and weather-cracked drums whose skins had long since stopped singing. Sifa approached, hands clasped. The old woman's white head wrap looked like a cloud anchored by wrinkled mahogany shoulders. One cataract-clouded eye traced the girl's posture, and Bibi breathed a knowing hum. "I heard the fire speak louder than crickets last night," she said, turning a cowrie bracelet between her fingers. "It told me a bright star tried to dim you." Sifa's throat pulsed but no words came. Instead she opened the banana leaf packet. Ash fluttered onto the woman's rough palm. Bibi leaned closer, inhaling the scent. "Smells of ink and stubborn hope," she murmured, then looked up. "Hope can be copied again, child, if your memory still burns." The old woman beckoned Sifa behind the stall where a half-collapsed storage hut offered shade. From a split-gourd jar she produced slivers of charcoal, a bundle of flattened banana leaves and a coil of sugarcane twine. "Paper costs coin," she said, "but stories grew long before paper did. Speak. Let your tongue carve what your hand will later follow." Sifa perched on an overturned mortar, heart quivering. The air smelled of turmeric and old stories, and suddenly the weight of loss eased just enough for breath to flow. She began with the first tale she had ever copied, about a moon spirit who traded riddles for maize husks. The words came slowly, jagged as the ash fragments, yet each phrase smoothed the next. Bibi nodded, tapping rhythm on a calabash rim to keep the cadence steady, stopping her when a metaphor tangled. "Again, but lean out the fat," she instructed, and Sifa obliged, trimming stray flourishes the way Malika once trimmed cassava roots. By noon the story sat complete inside her voice, leaner yet somehow richer. They tore the midribs from fresh banana leaves, pressed them flat beneath a heavy mortar stone, and left them to dry in sun patches. While they waited, Bibi brewed hibiscus tea sweetened with baobab pulp. She told of her youth wandering from coastal wells to desert oases, trading epics for camel rides and laughter for millet cakes. A griot's back is to the road, she said, but the heart never leaves home. Her eye glimmered at Sifa's rapt attention. When bones stiffened I chose the stall, yet every gourd remembers a song. Your bones are sapling green. Let's teach them the wind. They practiced memory like muscle. Bibi would recite a verse in sing-song Kinyarwanda, then switch to Swahili cadence so the same sentiment danced differently. Sifa had to translate each version into crisp, lean prose without losing the hum of the original. Mistakes earned playful thwacks with a palm frond. Successes won a grin that revealed one gold tooth, shining like sunrise caught in laughter. All the while shoppers flowed past, none suspecting that in the narrow shade a manuscript was being reborn leaf by leaf. By late afternoon the banana leaves had stiffened to a supple parchment. Sifa dipped a sliver of charcoal in cassava starch to deepen the black, then wrote the moon spirit tale anew, her strokes precise yet quick as drumming fingers. Bibi hovered, correcting posture, back straight, elbow loose, words must breathe. When the final mark dried, Sifa held the makeshift page to the light. The characters looked larger than those in her old notebook, as if announcing their refusal to shrink from fire again. Sweat trickled down her spine, but triumph cooled her skin. She slipped the leaf into a gourd sleeve lined with soft grass. Bibi handed her a second leaf. Tomorrow another tale, she said. We will move faster, exams chase clocks. Sifa nodded, gratitude thick in her chest. For a moment she imagined kneeling to thank the old woman properly. Instead she offered her scorched fingers for a gentle clasp. Bibi squeezed once. Your mother's spirit walks proudly today, she whispered. The words steadied Sifa more than any fatherly blessing could. Evening shadows stretched across the lane when Sifa finally turned toward home, gourd cradled like a newborn. The air smelled of simmering beans and, somewhere distant, the faint tang of wood smoke, less a threat now, more a warning never to stop writing. At the threshold she paused. Through the open door she saw Malika kneeling beside the hearth, face lantern-lit, eyes red-rimmed. Their gazes met. In that silence Sifa sensed two truths humming together. The story she carried was heavier than ash, and the sister who burned the first copy was still part of every sentence she would ever write. She stepped inside. Jabari looked up from replating a fishing net, worry creasing his brow until he noticed the gourd. Sifa said only, I start again. He nodded, words failing, yet pride shimmered in his damp eyes. Malika's shoulders sagged. She whispered something, prayer or apology Sifa couldn't tell, but the softness of the tone cracked the wall between them a finger's width. Sifa set the gourd on the low table where the satchel had once rested, then reached for a clay cup to fetch water. Tomorrow would bring quills fashioned from maize stalks and more banana leaves drying in the sun. Tonight, she told herself, was for letting the memory of flame cool into resolve. When sleep finally claimed her on the reed mat, the scent of charcoal ink lingered on her fingertips and the echo of Bibi Rahima's calabash rhythms pulsed against the quiet room. In her dream she saw the moon spirit again, tracing silver lines across a sky made of banana leaf pages. Wherever its fingertip traveled, words glowed bright enough to outshine any fire, and Sifa followed, carrying ash that had learned to blossom into ink. Moonlight washed the abandoned mission yard silver, tracing bright ladders across weeds. Sifa slipped through the broken gate just after the third nightjar called, breath sharp from a long day of copying tales on banana leaves. She reached the library, a squat mud-brick hall whose roof tiles were missing like old teeth. Within, a single candle glimmered, Pastor Elijah, keeper of keys long declared unnecessary by newer priests. His patched cassock rustled as he beckoned. The door groaned, exhaling the scent of mildew and ink. 1 hour, he warned, pressing a graphite nub and 3 pressed leaves into her palm, then dawn betrays us. Shelves sagged like tired soldiers. Under a warped hymn book lay the treasure he had promised. An untitled volume, spine etched with a sunburst. Banned since the last governor's decree, it chronicled women rebels who smuggled messages in beadwork and brewed gunpowder from baobab sap. Sifa touched the brittle pages as if they might vanish. The first chapter told of Nyabok, a blacksmith's daughter who forged a key that opened every colonial padlock. The second praised Reby, a midwife who hid refugees in her herb room and healed them by night. Sifa copied steadily, letters marching across the green leaf veins. Each heroine's act felt like a torch relit inside her rib cage. When the candle guttered, she rolled the leaves, sealed them with wax dripped from the stub, and slid the bundle beneath a loose altar stone. Outside, bats cartwheeled against the paling sky, and she hurried home, pockets empty but mind roaring. Malika had not slept. She sat by the extinguished courtyard fire, turning cold ash between her fingers. All day villagers had praised Sifa's stubborn spark. In the grinding shed, at the well, even in whispers outside the latrine. Each compliment clanged against her ribs, yet inconveniently admiration kept surfacing like a stubborn cork. She dropped the ash, hating and missing her sister in the same breath. Later that morning, as Malika queued at the grinding stone, 3 elders debated whether education could truly feed a family. One grunted, "Brains do not plant yams," but another replied, "Brains map the river when yams fail." Each time Sifa's name surfaced, Malika's shoulders tightened, yet she found herself defending her sister with tiny murmurs, yes, hard work, yes, determination, until she realized she was arguing against her own jealousy. The contradiction exhausted her more than hauling water ever had. At sunrise, the district chief trotted into the market square astride a donkey draped in Kent cloth. 2 clerks beat tin pans while he proclaimed a provincial writing contest honoring visions of resilience. Gold coins, a trip to the capital publication, it was bait dangled before every hopeful mind. The theme, celebrating courageous women, seemed written directly for Sifa's outlawed histories. Sifa, returning from Bibi Rahima's stall with fresh palm rope twine, froze mid-stride as the decree echoed. She imagined Nyabok's name on printed pages, imagined paying academy fees without begging. Her pulse raced. By dusk the contest notice was pasted on the school wall, and children clustered beneath it like moths around a lantern. Teacher Kalum read the rules aloud, voice trembling with excitement. Original story, 3,000 words, deadline in 30 days. He caught Sifa's eye and gave a quick nod, an unspoken pledge of help. Behind the fence Malika listened, heart thumping at the sheer ambition of that word count, but also at the sweet ache of possibility. 30 nights, she thought, 30 chances to spit ash back at fate. From behind a millet sack, Malika overheard the same decree. What of the women who cooked, fetched, forgave? She pictured her mother nursing both sisters after a storm had blown half the roof away. A wild idea flickered. She too could enter, weaving the quiet heroism of everyday labor. But she owned no ink, no paper, only the weight of a wrong she still had not set right. That evening storm clouds stacked over the hills. Jabari ate in anxious silence, sensing currents he could not name. Sifa excused herself early, slipping out to meet Pastor Elijah for another clandestine hour. Malika watched her leave, the ache in her chest curling tighter than the braid in her hair. In the library Sifa flipped to a passage on Mapalo, a farmer who disguised a guerrilla code as harvest songs. The rain began drumming the roof. She copied furiously, pausing only as water spattered through a cracked tile. Pastor Elijah whispered, "Stories like these earn enemies. Handle them as one handles flame, with courage and respect." She nodded, thinking of her sister's bonfire and the bigger fires still smoldering in the world. Malika meanwhile wandered to Bibi Rahima's stall, rain needling her shawl. The old woman was closing flaps, but paused when she saw the younger sister. Malika bowed, voice shaking, "Teach me to remember aloud." Bibi studied her face, sorrow, resolve, then opened the stall again. "Tomorrow before sunrise," she said, "bring a tale worth the weight of regret." Malika felt both dread and relief, a path at last. Lightning split the sky as the sisters found themselves crossing the same courtyard from opposite sides, each soaked and clutching secret hopes. For a heartbeat they stood beneath the baobab, thunder rolling overhead. Sifa held a damp packet of forbidden leaves. Malika curled empty fingers that already rehearsed new narratives. Neither spoke, but both sensed a rope pulling tighter between them, destiny winding its knot. Back inside, Jabari dozed by the dying embers. The girls passed him like ghosts and lay on opposite mats, rain muttering on the thatch. Sifa whispered verses from Apollo's harvest song, shaping them into prose for the contest. On the other mat Malika mouthed a lullaby their mother once hummed, imagining how to open a speech with its cadence. Dawn, impatient, tugged at their dreams with golden fingers, reminding them promises await waking and resolution. Mist lifted from the river like thin silk as Sifa stepped into the hollowed log canoe, clutching a gourd wrapped in palm fiber. Inside lay her contest story, inked across cured banana leaves and weighted with a pebble so the wind would not steal it. The ferryman, a lean man whose oar was polished by decades of seasons, nodded once. Payment had already been arranged by teacher Kalum using last month's extra tutoring coins. The boat pushed off, slicing a hush through the mirrored water. Sifa glanced back at the village ridge. The baobab stood sentinel, its branches briefly catching dawn fire, then slipped behind reeds. The river opened wider than any road she had walked. Fishermen paddled beside floating nets that bobbed like rows of small tombstones. One whistled a tune that lilted through minor notes, then chuckled when Sifa tried to echo it. "Song must ride the belly, not the throat," he called, thumping his sternum. The rhythm lingered in her mind like punctuation waiting for a sentence. She asked its meaning. He said it was a lament for seasons when the tilapia refused to bite. She jotted the phrase phonetically on a spare leaf, thinking it could deepen her heroine's voice. Mapala would surely have sung about hungry nets. At the first bend a trio of young musicians clambered aboard, their calabash shakers and goatskin drum wrapped in cloth. They were traveling to a market upriver where a regional chief was blessing a new granary. The tallest offered Sifa roasted groundnuts and, between mouthfuls, explained the drumhead sigils. Spiraled cowries for prosperity, cross spears for vigilance, concentric rings for communal trust. "You see history as words," he told her, tapping the drum's hide, "but here history is vibration." She asked permission to trace the symbols. His eyes gleamed, so she sketched them onto her leaf margin, planning to weave the spiral motif into Nyabok's forged master key. Midday heat pressed down like a second canoe on her shoulders. The ferryman aimed for a sandbar where acacia trees cast lattice shade. They shared dried mango, and Sifa offered a line of Mapalo's harvest song. He responded with the original Chikunda version, correcting her cadence until her tongue found the right rise and fall. Every syllable felt like a stitch binding her manuscript tighter to the land itself. After lunch the current quickened. Papyrus walls towered on each side, their watery rustle reminiscent of brushes sweeping parchment. Around a reed bend river egrets lifted en masse, white wings sketching hieroglyphs against blue. Sifa closed her eyes, absorbing how the wing-beat tempo matched her story's third section, where Marembe hid refugees beneath herb bundles. She would describe the egrets as escape lanterns, silent yet illuminating the sky. Near sundown they reached Njoro Landing, a trading post of timber-stilt houses. Women hawked fermented sorghum. Children chased a goat wearing a shredded burlap cape. The ferryman pointed toward a tiled roof beyond the dock. "That is Madame Omandi's school. Spend the night, she shelters wanderers." Then he shoved off, already late to ferry dusk passengers back downriver. Sifa shouldered her small pack and approached the fenced compound. The sign read Riverbend Primary, mind is or heart the river. Inside, copper light-soaked mud walls lined with charcoal sketches. A woman in a blue wrap skirt sat grading papers. Gray streaked her braids, and her left wrist wore mourning beads for a husband lost to last year's fever. When Sifa introduced herself, the schoolmistress smiled with a softness that seemed carved from ache. Upon hearing Sifa's mission, Madame Omandi's eyes sparked. Stories must walk farther than their tellers. Over spiced pumpkin stew she asked to hear a passage. Sifa read the section about Nyabok prying colonial locks. The older woman listened, eyes half closed, then said, "The lock breakers also braided secret patterns into fishing baskets. The guards never suspected." She fetched a miniature basket from her desk, its weave tight as dawn light through lattice. "Add this. Courage often hides in plain use." Sifa traced the diagonal weave lines, grateful for the detail that would lace truth into fiction. Later they sat on the veranda watching fireflies swirl like drifting commas. Madame Omandi described her own late husband, a riverboat storyteller who could make drunks cry with a single lullaby. "He taught me that tales need tide," she whispered, "a rise, a pull, a settling." She picked up Sifa's leaves, shuffled them, and suggested shifting a reflective paragraph closer to the climax so the emotional high water peaked before ebb. Together they rearranged two sections. The story breathed easier, as if freed from tight shoes. Before dawn, the schoolmistress pressed a parting gift into Sifa's hand, a slender reed pen tipped with bronze wire. "It catches ink like a fishhook," she said. At the postal boat office, Sifa filled an envelope, sliding in her leaves, the pen's bronze glint tucked between for luck, then purchased passage under registered seal. Watching the clerk ink the docket, she felt her pulse ferrying 1,000 hopes. Back in the village, Malika had spent the night turning salvaged script between her fingers, the one charred page Sifa kept near her mat for courage. A corner had broken off, revealing their mother's tiny marginalia hidden beneath the original ink. Pain is bitter soil, till it and seedlings find room. The handwriting jolted Malika with an ache sweet as tamarind. She smoothed the burned edges against her palm, imagining her mother's steady voice pronouncing the line. At dawn she walked to Bibi Rahima's stall with the page pressed to her chest. The old woman crushed sorghum for porridge, eyes sharpening when she saw the fragment. Malika read the marginal note aloud. Bibi nodded slowly, then tied a strip of dyed cloth around Malika's wrist. "Wear your harvest reminder," she said, "and fetch your sister." 2 seeds planted apart still thirst for the same rain. But Sifa was already gone downriver, banana leaf manuscript sealed and sailing beyond reach. A buzzing urgency filled Malika, the same restless wind that had once driven her hands to fire but now propelled her toward redemption. She bartered 2 woven mats for fairy fare, stuffed cassava cakes into a cloth pouch, and pressed the charred page into her bodice. Pausing beneath the baobab, she whispered a promise. To mend the bridge her jealousy had burned, to stand beside her sister when judges opened envelopes in the provincial hall. Then she slipped through morning mist toward the river path, footsteps lighter than forgiveness yet heavier than fear, praying the current would still be gentle enough for 2 stories, once severed, now intertwined, to find the same destination. The provincial capital unveiled itself in slices through the dusty bus window, a skyline of tin roofs, faded billboards and the governor's new glass tower. Sifa pressed her forehead to the pane, heart rattling faster with every jolt of the suspension. She had imagined the city as a library writ large, but the first breath tasted of gasoline instead of ink. When the conductor shouted the final stop she gathered her small satchel, smoothed her second-hand dress, and entered noise that felt physical. Vendors flogged boiled maize beside men in western suits, mud splashed against shop signs, and 2 policemen lounged by a checkpoint, rifles like dogs. Sifa hugged her envelope of travel documents, the bronze-wired reed pen from Madame Omandi clipped inside, and asked directions to the Ministry of Culture. One officer eyeballed her accent and grunted that the office would not even open the packet unless she sprinkled, "Thank you, dust." His partner laughed, miming coins sliding across table. She thanked them anyway and walked on. The ministry gate loomed 3 streets later, stone lions guarding chipped green paint. Inside, a clerk with manicured nails and bored eyes checked names against a ledger. Contest entrants formed a restless queue, most older, some wearing university badges. A girl with ash-pale skin whispered that rural applicants were best off hiring a paper bearer, to ensure files reached the judge's desk intact. The bearer's fee equaled a month of millet. Sifa's pulse tightened. Hours crawled. Ceiling fans stirred only bureaucracy. Before her turn, an aide emerged, collecting envelopes from those who offered discreet bribes. Sifa's stomach knotted. What if the packet ended in a waste bin? She thought of Bibi Rahima's tap on the calabash, of Mapalo's harvest song weaving courage from scarcity, and forced herself to stand her ground. When her name was called she stepped forward, voice steady, handed over the sealed manuscript, and ignored the aide's raised eyebrow. The clerk stamped a receipt and motioned her aside. Achievement tasted sweet, yet doubt crept in, whispering that paper lions could still chew leaves. She walked toward the town hostel teacher Kalum had recommended, passing murals of past contest winners. Suits, smiles, diplomas. None looked like her, but perhaps one day a mural would display a plain girl with soot-shadowed fingers. Outside the hostel gate she froze. Malika stood beneath a jacaranda, dust streaking her skirt, the charred bracelet of dyed cloth around her wrist. 4 heartbeats. Sifa felt her knees unlock, memories of flame washing over promise. "Why are you here?" she asked, voice ragged. Malika swallowed. "To make sure the fire stays out." The answer sounded both childish and brave. They faced each other like roots from the same tree twisted in soils. Sifa marched into the courtyard, Malika following. In the dormitory their argument hissed in low tones so others would not hear. Sifa accused her sister of sabotage reborn. Malika countered with the marginalia line about hurt becoming harvest. Words ricocheted, yet neither sister stormed away. Finally Malika opened her pouch, producing a folded paper. Her own contest entry written in painstaking charcoal script, the everyday heroism of their mother told through rhythms Bibi had drilled before dawn. "If the judges choose one of us," she said, "let them choose both." Shock prickled Sifa's scalp. The thought of their names printed side by side felt impossible and perfectly right, like 2 halves of one lock clicking into place. She remembered their childhood nights sharing the cracked storybook, and some unseen weight shed itself. "Truce," she whispered. Malika nodded. They placed their manuscripts on the narrow bunk, edges touching. Then Sifa suggested they read each other's drafts. Malika's language lacked polish but pulsed with raw marrow, mortar grinding, lullabies, sweat shining on a widow's brow. Sifa offered gentle edits, trimming repetition, threading in a refrain to echo between scenes. Malika in turn pointed out where Sifa's city passages skipped sense detail. She taught her sister the fisherman's lament she had overheard, weaving it into a climactic paragraph. Their shoulders brushed as they bent over the pages, merging ash and ink until the text smelled of both river spray and kitchen embers. At dusk they walked to Independence Square where finalists would soon be announced from a temporary stage. A brass band tested sour notes, white bulbs blinked overhead like restless thoughts. Around them contestants fidgeted, some muttering prayers, others rehearsing victory speeches. A tall man in a tailored jacket mocked Sifa's village sandals. Malika stepped forward, informed him that dust could polish a path smoother than polished shoes ever could. The man turned away, chastened, and Sifa's gratitude glimmered. An hour later an official read a litany of names who had met preliminary review. Both sisters held breath, both names were called. Relief hit like monsoon rain. They squeezed hands, tentative but sincere. For the next round they would deliver staged readings at dawn. Exhaustion tugged yet excitement buoyed them. Standing amid strangers and bright city lights, they realized crowns may be forged of gold, but they could just as well be folded from paper, fragile until reinforced by many layers, each sheet a story, each crease a compromise. Returning to the hostel they outlined rehearsal plans. Sifa would coach Malika on pacing. Malika would ensure Sifa kept the heartbeat of daily labor alive in her voice. Before sleep they traded talismans, Sifa giving the bronze-wired pen, Malika offering their mother's marginalia page. They promised that whichever sister claimed the medal, the story would credit them both, and if neither won they would self-publish pamphlets and scatter them like seeds along every ferry route. Lying on adjacent bunks, voices nearly spent, they listened to city traffic rise and fall, remembering the river's hush and the baobab's roots. Jealousy still smoldered, but shared purpose kept the embers controlled, warming rather than consuming. A fragile truce indeed, yet sometimes the most delicate paper, when folded carefully, can hold the shape of a crown long enough for dawn to find it. Ask ChatGPT. A taut hush hovered inside Independence Hall, broken only by the click of a television crew hoisting its boom mic overhead. The stage's bare wooden boards gleamed beneath floodlamps, their polish smelling faintly of lemon oil and old triumphs. 20 finalists waited in a semicircle, palms damp, contest numbers pinned to lapels like fragile shields. Sifa stood near the center, number 17, feeling each heartbeat thud against her ribcage as if knocking for permission to fly. In her pocket rested the bronze-wired reed pen. In her memory glowed every practice session under sputtering hostel bulbs, Malika counting syllables like beads to steady her cadence. A bell chimed. The moderator, a gray-suited official with a voice smooth as varnish, announced the theme once more, Visions of Resilience, and called Sifa forward. She inhaled the stage's warmth, stepped beneath the lights, and let the audience blur into shimmering shapes. Somewhere beyond the first row, she knew, sat Malika, clutching the charred marginalia page like a talisman. Their earlier rehearsal whisper still echoed in Sifa's ears, "Tell it true, little sister, and let the truth be enough." She began not with words but with silence, drawing a slow breath until the hall leaned inward. Then her voice rose soft as embers. In the dawn before dawn, two sisters were born from opposite halves of the same star. Her hands shaped the image in air, one palm flickering for flame, the other poised as a quill. She called the first sister Ndua, keeper of fire, forging paths in darkness. The second, Elua, guardian of ink, trapping dawn into lines so others might find it again. The tale unfolded in rhythmic pulses, each sentence braided from fisherman's lament, harvest song, and city clang, a tapestry she and Malika had stitched night after night. When Ndua's jealousy flared, she burned Elua's scrolls to prove the sky needed only fire to speak. Charcoal motes drifted across the stage lights as Sifa's voice dimmed to embers, relaying Elua's grief, her search among ashes for legible sparks. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Some heard myth, others sensed headlines disguised in allegory. Sifa's next words brightened. Elua rebuilt her stories on bark and shell, then journeyed back to confront her sister. She did not answer blaze with blaze. She wrote Ndua's name into the story of every sunrise until the fire-bearer felt her own reflection warming her from within. Forgiveness, Sifa said, is the only water that cools flame without quenching light. She closed her eyes for the final cadence, reciting the refrain Malika had insisted they add, Ash grows shy in the face of ink, for ink remembers and remakes. The hall seemed to exhale as she stepped back, heart hammering. Applause began at the rear, scattered claps blooming into thunder until rafters trembled. A judge wiped his glasses, another dabbed her eye. The moderator's polished voice cracked slightly as he thanked contestant 17 and called the next reader, but the energy lingered like incense. Malika watched from a side aisle, pulses roaring in her ears. Pride opened a door jealousy could not close. Moments later her own turn arrived. She ascended the steps with knees knocking yet spine straight. Her story spoke of an unnamed mother who spun courage from chores, her lullabies stitching invisible armor on children's hearts. The language was plainer than Sifa's but rang with lived rhythm. Pestle strikes, roof patch thuds, the sigh of a kerosene lamp turned low to save fuel. When Malika finished, applause flowed warmer than she had dared hope, but a restless rustle told her the crowd still tasted the earlier fire and quill myth. The remaining finalists performed, lilting sonnets, satirical skits, one densely footnoted essay read in a reverential monotone. Judges retreated backstage, leaving contestants to stew beneath chandeliers whose crystal drops glinted like impatient teardrops. Reporters circled, sniffing stories. A rural prodigy, a domestic caretaker, siblings competing. Cameras found Sifa, flashbulbs burst, a photographer asked if the bonfire rumor was true. Startled, she answered honestly, yes, pages burned, yes, pages were rewritten. Murmurs surged, pens scratched. Malika stepped beside her, shoulders squared. We rebuilt together, she added, voice steady. The reporter's smile widened, sensing sparks for tomorrow's front page. When judges returned, the hall fell under a hush taut as fishing line. Third place was announced, a university scholar whose father cheered loudest. Second place went to a radio playwright already bowing before her name landed. The chief judge, a venerable novelist with silver dreadlocks, unfolded the final parchment. His baritone carried like church bells. First prize for a work titled Sisters of Quill and Flame goes to Sifa Jabari. The hall erupted. Sifa stood frozen until Malika nudged her forward, then followed one step behind. The novelist pinned a gold medallion of 2 interlocking leaves onto Sifa's dress, handed her a certificate stamped with the national seal, and announced publication in the upcoming anthology. Microphones crowded. Is the tale autobiographical? Did jealousy really ignite a literal fire? Will the sisters collaborate on future works? Sifa tried to answer but words tangled. Malika slipped an arm around her waist, spoke clearly, the story stands for anyone who has burned or been burned, and for the rebuilding that must follow. Flashbulbs captured their clasped hands, the metal catching light like newborn flame. Yet Sifa sensed the narrative turning, reporters chiseling angles, rural drama, sibling rivalry, redemption arc. Their private scar would be public currency by morning. Backstage, while officials finalized publication contracts, a junior editor approached with giddy admiration, yet her first question probed the bonfire. Malika bristled, but Sifa touched her arm. Truth already walked the stage, she told the editor. Let the book tell the rest. They signed the anthology agreement, ensuring both their names appeared on dedication pages. Sifa as author, Malika as historical consultant. Ink at last officially overwrote ash. Evening spilled across the capital like spilled ink, violet and thick. On hostile steps the sisters shared roasted maize from a street cart, the metal dangling between them on its ribbon. Sifa admitted that despite victory she feared the gossip blaze might scorch their future. Malika held the metal to catch lamplight. Crowns of paper burn fast, she said, but crowns of story are clay, fire strengthens them. She slipped the ribbon over both their heads so the disc rested at the midpoint of their joined shoulders. Newsprint would indeed explode next day. Headline, Sisters Blaze Lights Literary Throne, sidebar interviews with neighbors, grainy photos of the charred courtyard. Some readers would scoff at rural melodrama. Others would pre-order the anthology longing for myth that mirrored their own feuds. But on that night, in the hush after cheers, 2 sisters who had once sat beneath a single threadbare storybook walked home beside the city's river, its lamplit ripples resembling long pages unrolling toward the horizon. Their reflections moved together, one of fire, one of quill, yet the water blended both into a single shimmering line, proof that what survives flames can illuminate the dark far beyond its origin blaze. Ask ChatGPT. The afternoon sun hovered like a gentle lantern above the savannah, its heat softened by a late-season breeze that lifted dust and the faint tapping of goat bells. At the edge of the village square a new building stood where scrub once grew, walls of sun-baked brick, roof of tin painted sky blue, and windows framed in cedar. A polished board announced its name in deep brown ink, Sifa Malaika Community Library. Inside, shelves hugged 3 walls, already filled with donations, banana leaf manuscripts, printed volumes from the coastal capital, stitched folktales rescued from trunks, even a solar tablet stocked with recorded songs. 2 hand-carved chairs awaited the founders. Sifa entered first, breath caught between disbelief and joy. Silver threaded her hair now, but her eyes still burned with possibility. Malaika followed, steps measured, carrying a linen-wrapped basket. Years of cataloging had gentled her voice and straightened her spine. Children whispered "Mama" pages as she passed. She smiled but kept the basket secret. A hush spread when Jabari tapped his walking stick for attention. Hair white as river foam, he spoke of the day his daughters were born and how their shared breath filled the village with new dreams. His voice trembled, yet pride steadied it. Sifa thanked elders who once doubted yet later donated mats for readers, thanked Bibi Rahima whose calabash rhythms rescued her courage, thanked Teacher Kalum and Madam Omandi who mailed books whenever they could. She drew a palm fiber ribbon across the doorway. With a fisherman's knife she sliced it clean. Applause blossomed, mingled with ululations. Children surged, then paused as Malaika raised a hand. Climbing the stone dais, she addressed the crowd in their mother's cadence. She spoke of embers choosing to glow instead of fade. She admitted her own failure and said forgiveness became her hardest lesson. Then she unwrapped the basket, revealing a restored leather volume, its spine pressed with gold leaf, the mother's book of endless evenings. Gasps rippled. Older villagers recognized the once-lost storybook. Malaika showed the margin where their mother had written, "Pain tilled becomes harvest." Together the sisters carried the book to the highest shelf beneath a skylight so dawn would find it each morning. Wind rattled the baobab leaves and a shaft of light settled on the cover. Dust motes danced like new constellations. Sifa whispered the opening line their mother loved. "Between yesterday and tomorrow lies a flame hungry for stories." The crowd answered with a soft hum. After the ceremony, Malaika led the first group of readers to a circular bench. She opened the national anthology containing Sisters of Quill and Flame, and read. Her voice, once hesitant, now flowed warm and sure. Sifa sat among the children, delighted by their questions. One asked if paper ever fears fire. Sifa replied that paper respects flame but trusts water, and stories are water. In a corner Jabari traced unfamiliar characters, respecting them despite dimming eyes. Bibi Rahima tapped a calabash, pleased her rhythms had a roof. Vendors outside sold iced tamarind juice to visitors from nearby hamlets. Goats bleated, anchoring the moment in everyday life. As afternoon leaned toward dusk, Sifa and Malaika stood beneath the old baobab. The hollow where Sifa once read now held them both. A plaque above the opening read, "Reading Nook of Beginnings." Shadows of pods scattered across the dirt like ink blots. Malaika wondered who would guard the shelves when her eyes dimmed. Sifa answered that stories choose guardians like rivers choose paths, patiently. She confessed sometimes fearing the bonfire would replay but trusting ink to rise again. Their joined hands remembered both heat and healing. Evening layered the sky in indigo. Inside, solar lights glowed on the shelves. From an open window drifted children reciting Nyabok's ballad of unbreakable keys. The words floated across the courtyard, brushing the sisters' faces like river wind. Sifa closed her eyes to hold the moment. When she opened them, Malaika watched the horizon where the sun lowered like a closing book. Without speech they returned to the library. At the threshold Sifa paused to memorize brick walls flush with amber light, silhouettes bent over pages, their mother's book shining under the skylight. Night deepened. Malaika recorded the day's loans in neat columns. Sifa drafted a letter announcing monthly story evenings. Pencils scratched like distant rain. Outside the baobab sighed. Before locking up, Malaika placed her own debut collection, Till It Harvest Comes, on the display table. Sifa slipped a note inside, for the girl who fed the fire and then tended the garden. Another copy went into a bag bound for the mobile donkey library. They stepped into starlight. Crickets fiddled, a drum beat slow and sure. The sisters walked home side by side, lanterns swinging between them, casting twin shadows that overlapped and parted with each step. At the gate Sifa whispered good night but lingered. Fireflies floated above the grass, tiny mirrors of distant galaxies, proof that small lights endure. Malaika turned. "We should write a new story," she said, voice soft but certain. "One where the sisters begin with forgiveness, not flames." Sifa nodded. "And let the village decide the ending." They laughed. the open laughter of people who know endings are merely places to breathe. A gentle wind lifted the baobab's highest leaves, sounding like pages turned by an unseen hand. The same breeze traveled through open library windows, stirring margins, spreading cedar and ink into the night. It carried farther, over sleeping goats and silent courtyards, toward riverbanks where fishermen hummed old laments and into classrooms where a teacher might tomorrow begin with, "Once 2 sisters." In that hush the village settled. On the library roof the skylight caught a sliver of moon, sending it down to the highest shelf where the restored book rested like a crown. Gold lettering glowed, not from flame but from remembered fire turned bright. The night itself seemed to write. From ashes, history rose ink bright, and under vigilant stars kept writing, ever onward into the waiting hearts of dreamers. Ask ChatGPT.